Lynn Pearson, author, poet, screenwriter, LDS icon, really.
Whoa.
Thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
It is my pleasure. Thank you, Bob.
Now, for those who are not familiar with you and your work, you are a prolific writer, a prolific poet, a prolific screenwriter. In fact, you've done a lot of work, both in the LDS community and out. This is a real treat for me to get to interview you. Your take, though, on homosexuality and polygamy and those kinds of issues doesn't necessarily fall within the area that the church teaches. Am I describing this correctly?
Well, the church has teachings about all of these things, but my experience in life has called me to look at these issues. You see, I was born into women's issues, and then I married into gay issues. Mm-hmm. For those who don't know, perhaps I should just say that I married a very dear queer man, Gerald Pearson, who is the only reason, really, that I became a published writer.
Did you know at the time that he was gay?
We had that conversation directly after our engagement. And he had been fasting for 3 days and said he had something really important to talk to me about. And he told me that this had been in his background, homosexual feelings and some action, but that's not who he was. And he was very devoted to the LDS Church. And he loved me as very best he possibly could. And he wanted to do everything right. He wanted to have a family. And so this was in 1966 that we married. And all that we knew is what we had been taught, that this is just a sin, that you get on the wrong track, you repent, you come back, you find a woman that loves you, which I did, and you're just fine. And then we learned before too long that, Gerald learned that his inner workings had not changed the way he had really been promised, the way he had hoped. So we were married for 12 years, had 4 children, a move from Provo to Walnut Creek, California. And when we decided that he knew he was not going to be able to maintain the marriage the way the marriage needed to be maintained, we divorced and remained good friends. And 6 years later, he passed away from AIDS. In my home where I was taking care of him at that time, and he and I had never talked about the idea that I might write our story. It had never, ever come up.
But in fact, you did.
I did, and I should have mentioned earlier, he insisted, when he read my little poems, he insisted that we publish them. We came up to Salt Lake City to see who'd be first in line to publish them, and of course nobody would, so Gerald said, I can become a publisher. So we borrowed $2,000, published 2,000 copies of a little book called Beginnings, and that was how everything started for me. And then after his passing, I wrote our story, as I saw that how many young men especially were dying on the streets of San Francisco, having been thrown away by their families, thrown away by their churches. And I thought, wow, if I dared, I could help with that. And so I wrote that book.
You wrote a book, and I believe it was your first one, Goodbye, I Love You.
It was not the first one. I had written a number of books prior to that. But you wrote the book, Goodbye, I Love You, which documented, or at least gave the account of you marrying Gerald Pearson, who turned out to be gay, and you divorced, and then he died of AIDS. You took care of him all through his illness, right up to his last breath. Where did you find it inside yourself in that time, in that period, during the 70s and 80s, where the church was teaching that homosexuality was a sin? Where did you find it inside yourself to be able to play that role so well? Well, Bob, you see, the church that I grew up in also taught me what would Jesus do. And clearly, Jesus would have me take care of Gerald as I would take care of Jesus if he were dying in front of me. And I still love Gerald as my friend. And so there was no other option for me but to walk with him to the very end and to take care of him.
It must have caused you tremendous pain at first to realize that what both of you thought would go away did not go away.
Yep.
Can you describe that to us?
Well, it was just heart-ripping. And for both of us, really. I just had never anticipated. See, I grew up a good little LDS girl who did everything right. I really did. And this was just not in the plan of what was supposed to happen. But as, you know, life gets complicated for all of us. And this huge complexity for me is just what happened. And Gerald said to me a number of times, Blossom, which he always called me.
Called you Blossom.
Yep. He said, I know that you and I agreed to do a project together. And he was speaking from a very high spiritual level. He was always trying to see the large, large spiritual picture. He said, I am so sorry that this project that we are involved in is so painful for you. But I know that we agreed to do something important, and this is it.
It sounds very much like the both of you provided a lot of comfort and solace and refuge for each other.
That's true.
Through this entire... Did you ever anticipate that that could be the case going forward when this all was happening to you?
Well, you just have to take one day at a time. And I just did what had to be done at that time, believing, as I had somehow already established in my brain, that all pain can be labor pain. And so while I had no idea what was going to be coming of all this, I just had to have confidence that somehow, because I felt that this was the right thing to do, that it would open into something good. And so that's all I knew.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has long taught that acting on homosexual tendencies or urges is a sin. But there seems to be an evolution going on within the church, and indeed a conversation going on with the LGBTQ community. But based on history, we know that the church doctrines are not going to change, and likewise the positions and issues facing the LGBTQ community are not going to change either. There seems to be a collision course going on here. Where do you see this relationship going?
I would not pretend to prophesy precisely how it's going to look, but I know that my church is not at the end of the journey on this. As you say, there has been a lot of progress in scientific understanding and in human understanding. And I know there's a lot of dialogue between church leadership and people in the LGBTQ community. And that is just going to continue. And all I will say is I know we are not at the end of the journey, and we will only be there where at a time when everyone feels truly capable of being in the congregation with the person that they love and feeling honored for that relationship.
As I look behind us, I believe this is you. Is that not you?
Oh my gosh.
In the Mormons for marriage equality?
That is me. That's the only time I have walked in a parade. That was in San Francisco. Yeah, wow.
As we talk about the future of this relationship between the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the LGBTQ community, do you see a day where this kind of thing, where marriage equality as defined as gay marriage and lesbian marriage, will be something accepted in the church?
I believe that more and more gay couples will be accepted as part of the loved community in the church. Now, precisely how marriage itself or eternal marriage will look like, I have no idea. But I just know that we are not at the end of the journey. And we need to keep going, because until there is not one more suicide where the feelings about God's condemnation being part of the reason that this person chooses to take their life, until there is no more of that, then we have a lot of work still to do. And I know that out there in your listenership right now, there are a lot of LDS young people of homosexual orientation or another aspect of the queer identity who are made to feel so hateful of themselves that they find sometimes that the only way out. And years ago I talked to a dear friend who said, I know that I won't be going to the celestial kingdom. I'll be going to the lowest kingdom. I just as well go now. And he did make a suicide attempt, and he was unsuccessful with that. But it should be appalling to every one of us who claim to be a follower of Christ that there are so many among us who feel that they are outside the parameters of God's love because of who they are and of whom they want to choose as an intimate companion. We have a lot of work yet to do on that issue.
In the Proclamation on the Family, there is a sentence that talks about how gender is essential in God's plan. And in fact, leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints came out recently and clarified what that means as saying the gender, the biological gender at birth. I know that clarification by leadership of the church has caused a lot of concern in the LGBTQ community. How do you view it?
I come here with no authority to contradict anybody else's authority, but I will tell you that it is not a black and white situation. I have a good friend who was born, and she didn't know it at the time. She was born with the sexual organs of both genders. She grew up as a boy, and later in life, a doctor determined that this unusual blood that was happening was menstrual blood, and that she had organs, female organs, that were wanting to blossom. And there had to be a decision made. She is now living life as a woman. Nature combined with God creates circumstances that we do not know. And I think our only job is to come down on the compassionate side of the issue and do our best for all of the people who feel different.
The statement recently by a member of the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints clarifying what gender means as being the biological gender at birth has created a lot of emotion now in the LGBTQ community, especially within the church and close to the church. It seems as if the church is taking 2 steps forward and maybe 1 or 2 steps back each time something like this comes out. Where do you see this kind of thing going?
I just see it as the dance that you described. And whether it's 2 steps forward and 1 back and whatever, we will not know until we are at a more enlightened point. I like to be up in my spiritual helicopter, just kind of looking down, trying to figure it out, looking at history, but way back here. And, and the progress that we have made since Gerald and I married in the Salt Lake Temple in 1966. The progress, and that was 3 years before the Stonewall deal. The progress that has been made now is monumental, and we have to honor that. And we also have to say there are plenty of things that are still so unclear and to many people handled in a way that does not feel Christ-like. And I think we just need to do our best to ourselves and to encourage the whatever church leadership we are in touch with to continue to study, to learn, to talk to people, and always come down on the side of compassion.
There is an element within the church who are not only familiar with your works and hold you in high esteem, are now aware of your positions on eternal polygamy because of your book that we'll get into in just a minute. But your positions on eternal polygamy and your positions on LGBTQ issues as well. For those folks who are wondering, I mean, you are still an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, correct?
Oh, I am.
Okay.
And you might be surprised to know that I am dearly loved in my ward and in my stake.
How do you then reconcile these feelings and your opinions about the things that the church has taught? How do you reconcile that with the church and its leadership that comes out and makes proclamations and says things and clarifications that are hurtful to the LGBTQ community and that do nothing to walk back issues of polygamy?
Well, see, I have also been taught to use my own heart, my own brain. I have been encouraged always that we are here to be part of the progress and not to just sit around and say, oh, what do you want me to do now? And somehow or other, I have personally always had a calling by life to look at this and look at that because of my deep feelings. I came here looking around and saying, what's wrong with this picture? Why is everything important being done by men? And then really it was polygamy that grabbed my attention. And I begin this book with a little story of a dear, dear cousin of mine whose husband had passed away 8 or 10 years before. And she was constantly concerned, oh, what if my husband has taken another wife over there?
On the other side of the veil.
On the other side of the veil.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, no, that's not going to, well, that's what we've been taught, she said. And I know that's what we have been taught. But you see, there are a lot of things in LDS teaching, call it doctrine, call it policy, call it whatever you want. Things change from time to time. And we know that polygamy as a lived experience was stamped out and with great fervor and difficulty a long time ago. But what has not been stamped out is the concept that when we move into the eternities, and according to what is happening here, there definitely will be eternal polygamy. We know this. We know that right now, an LDS man whose wife dies can be sealed to a second wife with the promise that he will claim both of those women as his wives in eternity. We know that that's the case.
How does that make you feel as a Latter-day Saint woman?
Horrendous. Sick to my stomach. Sick in my heart and in my mind. And I have talked to so many women who wake up in the middle of the night, even young married women who love their husbands dearly, who hold back a part of their heart from their husband because they know that if they die before he does, surely he will remarry, and then she will be obligated into an eternal marriage of polygamy for forever and ever, unless she leaves him and leaves her children. It's a terrible place to put women in. And I think it's not only painful, I think it's false, and I think it's wicked. And so, yes, I wrote this book, The Ghost of Eternal Polygamy. And I believe that dear brother Joseph made an error, and I print that in the book. Nobody is perfect. No prophet in the Old Testament was ever perfect. All of them were
human beings.
Absolutely. And many of them were condemned by God for doing this and this and this. So all I know is that what is good and righteous bears good fruit. Polygamy has not borne good fruit. And today, the specter of eternal polygamy does not bear good fruit.
You have done a lot of research on the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joseph Smith, who introduced polygamy into the church long before Brigham Young ever took part in it.
Right.
How do you, and in your book, you confess that you love Brother Joseph.
I do.
How do you reconcile that love for him when he introduced a concept in polygamy that is so hurtful?
Don't we all know people who have made hurtful mistakes? I know them, you know them, and it is not my business to judge Joseph, except to say, Joseph, what you left for us has broken the hearts of hundreds of thousands of LDS women. And we're not at the end of that journey. We're just not. And I believe there will come a time when that will be adjusted in order to stop breaking the hearts of good LDS women. And men, this is not a good thing for men. And there are a number of stories in the book of how men have a very difficult time with this as well.
Does leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints listen to you when you make these opinions public?
If they do, I have no way of knowing about it.
So you have not had any kind of conversations with them about this?
I've had no conversations with the brethren about any of this. I did with my stake president and my bishop before I put out the book. I made an appointment with each one of them to say, I'm having a book coming out. It's going to have some attention, I think, and I want you to know what it says. So I visited with each one, read them parts of it, told them why I was doing it, and
what was their response?
They responded very, very well.
So you have never worried about your church membership. I mean, there have been times in church history, and not that far in history, where there has been a purging, so to speak, of outspoken critics.
Right. And I know that many of the things that I have said are more challenging than things that have been said by people who have been excommunicated. Now, I will tell you that if I knew that I was going to be excommunicated for writing The Ghost of Eternal Polygamy, I would still have written it, because I was called to do that. And you have to follow what's inside of you. But the book has, I have received so many emails from people who thank me for it, who say, this helps me to stay in the church because I can now throw away polygamy and maintain the church that I love. So all I know is that I personally did what I felt called to do, and that's all I'm responsible for.
Many Latter-day Saints consider everything that the church leadership does and says as coming from God. Do you? I believe these good men try very, very, very hard and bring to us a lot of things that are very, very godly. It is very clear from history, from the things that have been said, that have been later changed, that not everything that Brigham said or that anybody else of the early brethren said came right from the mouth of God. That's just not the way it happens. And it's up to us to listen and follow the things that feel godly. You know, I wrote I gave a talk at Sunstone once it can be found now on the Sunstone on the internet, called Why I Stay. And essentially, my idea of God comes down to the fact that God is love.
consequently, wherever love is, there God is also, as the little song says. Meaning that where in a heterosexual marriage or in a homosexual marriage you see true caring, true devotion and fidelity and true love, that's where God is. And where in Islam, where in Catholicism, where in Buddhism you find love, there's where you find God. And where in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints you find real, true love and caring, that is where you find God. And I personally, in my experience in my church, in my ward, in my stake, elsewhere, in the church community, I find an enormous amount of love. And consequently, there's an enormous amount of God there. And that's good enough for me. And wherein I find pockets where I believe, and through who else's eyes can I see but my own? Wherein in my church I see areas where, to my perception, there is not love. I have the opportunity to help create more love, which I am trying to do for our dear queer LDS people, and also for our people who are so distressed about their future, their eternal future with eternal polygamy. So that's just my calling.
If you had the opportunity to sit down one-on-one or even in a group setting and talk directly to the leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints about the doctrines of polygamy and the LGBTQ issues that are so prevalent right now, what advice or what counsel or what would you say to them?
Well, you see, I did sign a copy of The Ghost of Eternal Polygamy to every one of the 15 top general authorities and the women leaders, also with a copy signed by name to each wife. So I did personally give that to them as my hope. And as I inscribed it, I said, it is my hope that you will lead us into an era that is truly post-polygamy. And so that's what I would say to them. And see, I know that they have received letters for decades from hurting women and from mothers and fathers of gay children saying, please help us. Please help us. So I would plead with them to continue to study the science of it all, to continue to talk to our dear queer members and their families, and to know that we have not yet finished the journey, and for them to be brave enough to take the next steps.
Lynn Pearson, prolific author, poet, screenwriter, playwright, LDS icon, thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Thank you. Bless you, Bob.
Bless you.